The cruelest betrayals never begin with strangers. They begin with the people who already know where your heart is. The crystal chandeliers hanging above the Grand Regent Ballroom scattered warm golden light across polished marble floors, catching every shimmer of diamond necklaces and tailored tuxedos that filled the room. A string quartet drifted through the air while waiters balanced silver trays of champagne with practiced precision. Every guest looked as though they belonged on the cover of a luxury magazine, except one man standing quietly near the entrance. Marcus Carter adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit, one he had owned for years, impeccably pressed despite its age. He wasn't uncomfortable. He simply didn't care about impressing anyone. His eyes searched the room until they found Vanessa. She stood beneath a towering arrangement of white orchids, wrapped in a sleek emerald gown that turned heads wherever she moved. Her smile sparkled effortlessly as investors, executives, and socialites gathered around her. Beside her stood her mother, Patricia Brooks, elegant in black velvet, wearing the expression of someone convinced the world had finally arranged itself exactly as it should. Marcus took a slow breath before walking toward them. For a brief second, Vanessa met his eyes. There had once been warmth there, years ago, back when they shared tiny apartments, late-night pizza, impossible dreams, and promises whispered long after midnight. Tonight there was only calculation. Patricia noticed him first. Her smile widened, but it carried no kindness. She lifted her champagne glass slightly and spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Well, everyone, look who decided to come after all. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Marcus stopped a few feet away, offering nothing more than a polite nod. Vanessa crossed her arms. I honestly thought you'd understand this wasn't really your kind of event anymore. A ripple of restrained laughter moved through the circle. Marcus answered calmly. You invited me. I did. Vanessa replied with a perfectly rehearsed smile. Because I wanted closure. Patricia stepped forward before Marcus could respond. Closure requires honesty, Marcus. These people deserve to know you're my daughter's soon-to-be ex-husband. This time the laughter came more freely. Someone whispered. Another guest glanced Marcus up and down before looking away with visible pity. Patricia continued without missing a beat. Vanessa has worked incredibly hard to build relationships that matter. She can't keep dragging around someone who never became anything. Marcus remained silent. He neither defended himself nor lowered his eyes. Vanessa reached into her designer clutch and slowly removed a cream-colored envelope. She held it between two fingers as though presenting an award. Divorce papers, she announced lightly. I figured tonight was symbolic. New beginnings deserve memorable endings. Several guests exchanged amused smiles. One raised a glass as if witnessing entertainment rather than the quiet collapse of a marriage. Patricia laughed softly. Go ahead, Marcus. Sign them. It'll save everyone unnecessary embarrassment. Marcus accepted the envelope without hesitation. His fingers rested on the thick paper for only a moment before he looked back at Vanessa. There was no anger in his face. No pleading. Only an unreadable stillness that somehow unsettled her for the first time that evening. She expected an argument. She expected excuses, accusations, maybe even tears. Instead, Marcus simply asked, Is this truly what you want? Vanessa never looked away. More than anything, he gave the faintest nod, almost grateful for the certainty in her answer. Somewhere across the ballroom, the orchestra shifted into another elegant melody while glasses clinked and conversations resumed, as though the room had already decided this chapter was over. None of them noticed the discreet man near the far wall lowering his phone after quietly sending a single message. They never saw the black luxury sedan arriving outside the hotel entrance. And not one person in that glittering ballroom imagined that the quiet man they had just dismissed was only minutes away from taking the first step toward a life none of them had ever believed was possible. Marcus looked at the envelope for several quiet seconds while the music continued as though nothing important had happened. The cream-colored paper felt strangely light in his hands, almost weightless compared to everything it represented. Around him, crystal glasses touched with cheerful chimes. Expensive perfume lingered in the air, and polite laughter floated beneath the glow of chandeliers. It was remarkable how easily a room full of successful people could mistake silence for weakness. Marcus slipped one finger beneath the flap and unfolded the documents with deliberate care. Every page had already been prepared. Every signature line waited patiently for him. Vanessa had planned this long before tonight. She had chosen the ballroom, the audience, even the perfect moment between speeches so that everyone important in her professional circle would witness the end of her marriage. Patricia folded her arms with quiet satisfaction. She had imagined this scene for months, and reality seemed even sweeter than her expectations. One guest leaned toward another and whispered something that drew another round of restrained smiles. Nobody bothered lowering their voices anymore. Marcus was no longer being treated as a husband. He had already become a story people would repeat over cocktails tomorrow morning. Vanessa watched him carefully, expecting resistance. She remembered every disagreement they had ever survived together, every difficult season when Marcus had refused to give up. She expected that same determination now. Instead, she saw something unfamiliar. Peace. It unsettled her more than anger would have. Marcus reached inside his jacket and removed a fountain pen he had carried for years. It was simple, black, and worn smooth from daily use. Patricia laughed softly. At least you brought your own pen. That might be the most valuable thing you own. A few people chuckled again. Marcus ignored the remark completely. Before lowering the pen to the paper, he lifted his eyes toward Vanessa one final time. I have only one question, he said gently. After tonight, if our paths never cross again, will you believe you made the right choice? Vanessa answered without hesitation. Absolutely. There was no bitterness in her voice, only certainty. Marcus nodded once. Then I hope your future gives you everything you believe you are choosing. He signed every page with calm, steady handwriting. No dramatic pause. No trembling hands. No final attempt to change her mind. The last signature dried beneath the ballroom lights as quietly as falling snow. Marcus closed the folder and handed it back to Vanessa. Patricia accepted it before her daughter could move, smiling as though she had just secured a long-awaited victory. That was easier than I expected, she said. Some people finally learn where they belong. Marcus offered a courteous smile that revealed nothing. Perhaps they do. Vanessa searched his face one last time, hoping to find disappointment, regret, anything that would reassure her she still mattered enough to hurt him. Instead, she found a strange stillness, as though the decision had released him from a burden she never realized he carried. That silence lingered between them longer than any argument ever had. Then Marcus turned toward the ballroom entrance. His footsteps remained unhurried across the polished marble floor. Behind him, conversations immediately resumed. Someone congratulated Vanessa on her fresh start. Champagne glasses rose into the air. The orchestra continued playing another elegant arrangement, while servers carried trays filled with sparkling drinks past smiling faces. Outside, cool evening air replaced the warmth of the ballroom. The city skyline shimmered beyond the hotel entrance, its towers reflecting thousands of tiny lights across the river. Marcus slipped his phone from his pocket just as it vibrated. The message on the screen contained only 6 words. They are ready whenever you are, sir. Marcus read it once before locking the screen without replying. Across the street, a long black luxury sedan waited quietly with its headlights glowing against the pavement. The driver remained beside the rear door without speaking. Inside the ballroom, nobody noticed the vehicle. Nobody wondered why it had arrived. And inside that celebration of wealth and status, not a single person realized that the most powerful guest of the evening had just walked out. Without saying goodbye, Marcus paused beside the waiting sedan without reaching for the door. The city breathed around him in soft layers of distant traffic, glowing office windows, and cool autumn air that carried the faint scent of rain across the avenue. The hotel behind him still pulsed with music and celebration, but it already felt like another world. The driver, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, offered a respectful nod instead of speaking. Marcus returned the gesture with the quiet familiarity of someone who had known this level of professionalism long before he ever chose to live without it. The rear door opened smoothly. Marcus stepped inside, and the cabin settled into complete silence except for the gentle hum of the engine. Rich leather, polished walnut trim, and soft ambient lighting surrounded him, yet none of it seemed to impress him. It felt less like luxury than memory. As the sedan pulled away from the curb, Marcus looked back through the rear window. The Grand Regent Hotel stood brilliantly illuminated against the skyline, its glass facade reflecting thousands of lights. Somewhere inside, Vanessa was probably accepting congratulations. Patricia was almost certainly telling guests that her daughter had finally escaped an ordinary life. Marcus did not resent either of them. That surprised even him. He simply realized that people could only judge the version of him he had allowed them to see. His phone vibrated again. This time he answered. "Marcus," came the calm voice on the other end. It belonged to Nathan Kingsley, the family's longtime attorney. Every syllable carried quiet urgency. "We have been trying to reach you all evening." Marcus rested his head against the seat. "I know." Nathan hesitated before continuing. "Your grandfather asked for you by name. He refused to sign anything until you arrived. The board has delayed tomorrow morning's meeting because of his decision." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. For years he had avoided conversations exactly like this one. He had walked away from the Kingsley name because he wanted to know whether a man could build a meaningful life without inherited power. He wanted friendships that were genuine, opportunities that were earned, and love that existed before titles or fortunes entered the room. He believed he had found that life with Vanessa. Tonight had answered a question he had never wanted to ask. Nathan spoke again, more gently this time. "He is running out of time, Marcus." Silence filled the line before Marcus finally answered. "I will be there within an hour." The call ended. The sedan turned onto the interstate, leaving the bright downtown district behind as the skyline stretched across the horizon like a sea of glass and steel. Marcus loosened his tie and looked down at the simple wedding band still resting on his left hand. For several seconds, he studied the thin circle of gold that had survived years of ordinary mornings, shared dreams, and promises that no longer belonged to two people. Carefully, without bitterness or hesitation, he slipped the ring from his finger and placed it inside the center console. There was no dramatic farewell. Some chapters simply reached their final sentence. The driver glanced into the rearview mirror. "Would you like us to proceed directly to Kingsley Estate, sir?" It had been years since Marcus heard anyone use that title. He answered with quiet certainty. "Yes." The sedan accelerated smoothly into the night while downtown lights disappeared behind them. At the same moment, back inside the ballroom, Vanessa accepted another glass of champagne as guests toasted her future, never noticing that financial news alerts had begun appearing on several phones around the room. One headline after another hinted that an unexpected leadership announcement from the powerful Kingsley Group would be made before sunrise. Nobody connected the story to the quiet man who had signed divorce papers less than 30 minutes earlier. Nobody realized that the life they believed they had just witnessed ending had actually been waiting to begin. The gates of Kingsley Estate opened long before the sedan reached them, moving with quiet precision instead of spectacle. Ironwork nearly 12 feet high revealed a winding driveway lined with towering oak trees wrapped in soft landscape lighting. Beyond them stood a limestone mansion overlooking more than 50 acres of carefully maintained grounds, its windows glowing against the dark sky like distant lanterns. Marcus had not crossed those gates in nearly 8 years, yet nothing felt unfamiliar. The fountain still echoed across the front courtyard. The old clock tower still marked every quarter hour. Even the scent of fresh cedar carried memories he had spent years trying to leave behind. As the car came to a smooth stop beneath the covered entrance, the front doors opened before he reached them. Nathan Kingsley stood waiting with 2 members of the household staff, all dressed with understated elegance rather than unnecessary formality. Nobody applauded his arrival. Nobody celebrated. They simply welcomed him home. Nathan offered a respectful nod. "Thank you for coming." Marcus answered quietly. "How is my grandfather?" Nathan lowered his voice. "He has been asking for you all evening. He refused to allow the board to proceed until you arrived." Marcus walked through the grand foyer, his footsteps softened by a hand-woven runner stretching beneath a sweeping staircase. Portraits of earlier generations lined the walls, each carrying the weight of decisions that had shaped one of the largest privately owned investment groups in the country. Marcus recognized every face, yet he felt more like a visitor than an heir. Years ago, he had chosen an ordinary apartment, an ordinary salary, and an ordinary life because he wanted to discover who he truly was without the Kingsley name opening every door before he knocked. Tonight, every familiar hallway reminded him that some responsibilities waited patiently, no matter how far someone tried to walk away from them. They entered a private study instead of a hospital room. Harold Kingsley sat beside the fireplace wrapped in a dark cashmere blanket, His silver hair neatly combed, his posture weakened but his eyes as sharp as ever. Several board members quietly stepped aside the moment Marcus entered. Harold smiled with unmistakable relief. "You came." Marcus crossed the room and gently shook his grandfather's hand. "You asked me to." Harold studied him for several seconds before speaking again. "I heard about tonight." Marcus did not ask how. News always traveled quickly inside powerful circles. Harold sighed softly. Sometimes life removes what no longer belongs before it places what truly does. Marcus remained silent. He had no interest in discussing Vanessa or the gala. Harold seemed to understand. He gestured toward the executives waiting near the windows. "They have spent years preparing reports, projections, and succession plans. None of that matters until you answer one question." Every conversation in the room stopped. Even the crackling fire seemed quieter. Harold looked directly into his grandson's eyes. "Will you finally accept the responsibility that has always been yours?" Marcus glanced around the room. He saw experienced executives, trusted advisors, and people who had spent decades protecting the company his family had built. None of them appeared arrogant. They simply waited. Nathan placed a thick leather portfolio on the table, but did not open it. Marcus rested one hand against its cover without looking inside. Outside the tall windows, dawn had not yet arrived, but the eastern horizon had begun to fade from black into deep blue. Somewhere across the city, Vanessa was likely sleeping peacefully, believing she had closed the final chapter of their marriage forever. She had no way of knowing that before sunrise the same financial world she admired so deeply would begin turning toward the man she had just left behind. Marcus drew one slow breath and finally lifted his eyes to meet his grandfather's steady gaze, ready to give the answer that would change far more than his own future. Marcus held his grandfather's gaze for what felt like an entire season before answering. The room remained perfectly still, every executive understanding that the future of Kingsley Group rested on a single decision. Finally, Marcus spoke with the same quiet confidence that had carried him through every difficult chapter of his life. "I will accept the responsibility, but I will do it my way." Harold Kingsley smiled for the first time that evening, not with triumph, but with relief. "That is exactly why it has always belonged to you." Nathan opened the leather portfolio and carefully arranged several documents across the polished mahogany table. Succession agreements, leadership appointments, voting authority, and confidential reports filled the pages, each prepared long before this night ever arrived. Marcus signed them one by one with the same steady hand that had signed his divorce papers less than 2 hours earlier. The contrast could not have been greater. One signature quietly closed the door on a marriage. The next opened the door to an empire. Outside the study, dawn slowly painted the eastern sky with soft shades of silver and blue. Inside, the board members rose from their seats almost at the same moment. One after another, they approached Marcus, offering handshakes that carried genuine respect instead of ceremony. None of them congratulated him for becoming wealthy. They already knew his wealth. They welcomed him because he had finally accepted leadership. Harold leaned back comfortably and folded his hands. "At 9 o'clock this morning, the markets will open. Before they do, the company will announce its new executive chairman." Marcus nodded once. No celebration. No extravagant press conference. Nathan looked slightly surprised. "Do you have another plan?" Marcus answered calmly. "Tell the truth. Nothing more." Across the city, morning sunlight filtered through the windows of Vanessa's condominium. She stretched comfortably before reaching for her phone, expecting the usual flood of messages from friends who had attended the gala. Instead, her screen displayed dozens of financial news alerts mixed with texts from coworkers asking whether she had seen the latest announcement. She frowned and opened the first headline. Kingsley Group scheduled for major leadership announcement before market opening. She barely glanced at it before setting the phone aside. Massive corporations changed executives all the time. It had nothing to do with her. Patricia called only moments later, sounding unusually excited. "Did you see the news? Whoever takes over Kingsley Group is going to become one of the most influential business leaders in the country overnight." Vanessa laughed lightly. "Maybe someone from the board has been promoted." Neither woman imagined they had spoken to that person only hours earlier. Back at Kingsley headquarters, the lobby reflected quiet confidence instead of luxury for its own sake. Polished stone floors, towering glass walls, and original works of modern art welcomed executives arriving before sunrise. Security officers greeted Marcus by name without hesitation. Elevators had already been reserved. Employees standing nearby instinctively stepped aside, recognizing someone they had not seen inside the building for years but had never forgotten. The executive boardroom overlooked the city from the 50th floor. Morning light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows as directors, investors, and legal advisors settled into their seats. Every chair was occupied except one at the head of the long walnut table. Harold entered slowly with Nathan beside him, and every conversation stopped. He looked around the room before speaking in a clear, measured voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. The future of Kingsley Group has been decided." The doors opened quietly behind him. Marcus stepped inside wearing the same charcoal suit he had worn to the gala. Nothing about his appearance had changed, yet every person in the room immediately stood to their feet. In that single silent moment, without a single boast or dramatic announcement, the ordinary man everyone had overlooked only hours before became the one person whose presence commanded the respect of an entire empire. The silence inside the executive boardroom lasted only a few seconds, but it felt powerful enough to reshape every assumption that had existed before Marcus entered. Harold Kingsley looked toward his grandson with unmistakable confidence before addressing the directors one final time. Effective immediately, Marcus Carter becomes executive chairman of Kingsley Group and the sole successor to our family's controlling interest. No applause followed the announcement. Respect arrived differently in rooms like this. Every executive remained standing until Marcus reached the chair at the head of the table. Only after he sat did everyone else quietly return to their seats. Nathan distributed the official succession documents, while photographers from the company's communications department captured only a handful of carefully controlled images. Marcus had insisted there would be no extravagant celebration, no dramatic speeches, and no unnecessary attention. He wanted the transition to reflect responsibility rather than spectacle. Within minutes, the official press release appeared across every major financial platform in the country. Business networks interrupted their regular programming. Investment analysts immediately began discussing the unexpected appointment. Commentators described Marcus as the private heir who had intentionally remained outside public attention for years before accepting leadership of one of the nation's most influential investment groups. Across the city, phones vibrated almost simultaneously inside office buildings, restaurants, and commuter trains. Vanessa had just arrived at her marketing firm's headquarters carrying a cup of coffee when several coworkers suddenly turned toward the large television mounted inside the reception area. A financial news anchor spoke with obvious excitement. Kingsley Group has officially confirmed that Marcus Carter has accepted the position of executive chairman and sole heir to the Kingsley family legacy. Vanessa stopped walking. The paper coffee cup slipped slightly in her hand. She stared at the screen, convinced she had misheard the name. Then a full photograph appeared beside the headline. It was Marcus, wearing the same charcoal suit from the previous evening, standing beside Harold Kingsley with calm confidence. Every sound around her seemed to disappear. One coworker looked back and forth between the television and Vanessa. "Wait, is that not your husband?" Another quietly corrected the sentence. "I thought she said they signed divorce papers last night." Vanessa could not answer. Her heartbeat drowned out every conversation around her. Patricia received the same alert while meeting friends for brunch at a downtown cafe. She immediately dismissed it as some unbelievable coincidence until another article appeared with additional photographs from Kingsley headquarters. Her smile faded completely. She reached for her phone and called Vanessa at once. Neither woman spoke during the first several seconds after the call connected. Finally, Patricia whispered, "Please tell me that is not Marcus." Vanessa stared at the television without blinking. "It is him." Back at Kingsley headquarters, Marcus reviewed quarterly reports, infrastructure investments, charitable initiatives, and employee development programs with remarkable focus. He asked thoughtful questions, listened more than he spoke, and thanked every department leader for their years of service. Several executives quietly admitted afterward that they had expected an inexperienced heir protected by family wealth. Instead, they found someone who understood every report before it reached his desk, because he had spent years learning how ordinary people actually lived and worked beyond corporate boardrooms. As the meeting concluded, Nathan placed a small stack of personal correspondence beside Marcus. These arrived within the last hour. Marcus glanced at the envelopes without opening them. Most came from investors requesting meetings. One, however, displayed handwriting he recognized immediately. Vanessa Carter. He rested his hand on the unopened envelope for only a brief moment before placing it back onto the desk. Some truths deserve patience before they deserved a response. 3 weeks passed before Marcus and Vanessa found themselves invited to the same event again, but this time the invitation carried an entirely different meaning. The annual Kingsley Foundation Charity Gala had become one of the most anticipated evenings in the country, bringing together business leaders, educators, medical researchers, and nonprofit organizations under one roof to celebrate philanthropy rather than status. Vanessa stared at the elegant invitation resting on her dining table for nearly an hour before deciding to attend. Her company had secured 2 seats months earlier, long before anyone knew who would lead Kingsley Group. Patricia insisted they could not stay away. "People need to see that you are confident," she said while adjusting the collar of her navy designer jacket. "Besides, Marcus will be surrounded by executives all night. He probably will not even notice us." Vanessa wanted to believe her mother, yet the unopened letter she had mailed to Marcus still haunted her thoughts. There had been no reply, no phone call, no message, only silence. That silence somehow felt louder than every cruel word spoken at the previous gala. The ballroom looked even more magnificent than the hotel, where everything had fallen apart weeks earlier. Massive crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, while soft piano music floated through conversations spoken in measured voices. Floral arrangements nearly 8 feet tall framed the stage where the evening's presentations would soon begin. Every place setting displayed the silver crest of the Kingsley Foundation, and enormous digital screens quietly rotated through stories about hospitals, scholarships, and community programs supported by the organization. Vanessa and Patricia entered together, expecting the familiar rhythm of networking and introductions. Instead, they immediately sensed something different. Conversations paused for only a heartbeat before politely continuing. Yet several people who had once greeted Vanessa warmly now offered little more than courteous smiles. Others simply nodded from a distance before turning back toward more important discussions. Nobody behaved rudely. They simply behaved differently. Reputation, Vanessa realized, could change without anyone raising their voice. Patricia attempted to recover the evening by approaching a well-known investment executive she had proudly introduced herself to only weeks earlier. He smiled politely, shook her hand for a brief moment, then excused himself after spotting another guest across the room. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Vanessa watched the exchange without saying a word. She suddenly understood how quickly influence shifted when relationships changed direction. A few minutes later, the ballroom lights softened. Quiet anticipation spread through the crowd as guests instinctively turned toward the grand entrance instead of the stage. No announcement had been made. No music had changed. Yet experienced executives somehow recognized that someone important had arrived. The entrance doors opened slowly. Marcus stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, accompanied by Nathan Kingsley and several senior members of the foundation's leadership team. He looked almost exactly the same as he had weeks earlier. His posture remained calm. His expression remained thoughtful. The only difference was the way the room responded to his presence. Conversations faded naturally. Distinguished guests crossed the ballroom to greet him. Foundation directors, university presidents, civic leaders, and international investors welcomed him with genuine respect, not because of inherited wealth alone, but because the weeks since his appointment had already revealed a leader who valued people more than appearances. Marcus accepted every greeting with quiet humility, taking time to remember names, ask about families, and thank longtime partners for their commitment to the Foundation's mission. Vanessa stood completely still as she watched the same man who had once been dismissed as ordinary become the center of a room filled with extraordinary people. For the first time since signing the divorce papers, she understood that nothing about Marcus had truly changed. The only thing that had changed was what everyone else had finally been allowed to see. The lights gradually dimmed until only the stage remained illuminated, wrapped in a warm golden glow that reflected across hundreds of crystal glasses. Every conversation faded into silence as Harold Kingsley slowly approached the podium with Nathan standing a respectful distance behind him. Age had softened Harold's voice, but had not diminished its authority. He looked across the ballroom with quiet appreciation before speaking. Every year this foundation gathers extraordinary people who believe success means lifting others instead of standing above them. Tonight, however, I would like to recognize someone whose greatest accomplishment cannot be measured on a balance sheet. The enormous screens behind him shifted from photographs of hospitals and scholarship recipients to a single image of the Kingsley family crest. Guests leaned forward with quiet curiosity. Harold continued, "For many years I worried that the future of our family would be entrusted to someone who understood business but not humanity. I was wrong." He turned toward Marcus, who remained seated among the guests instead of standing near the stage. "Marcus, would you join me?" The ballroom erupted into warm applause. Marcus rose calmly and walked toward the stage with the same measured confidence that had carried him through every difficult moment in recent weeks. He neither hurried nor sought attention. As he stepped beside his grandfather, Harold rested one hand gently on his shoulder. "Many people know Marcus today as the executive chairman of Kingsley Group," Harold said. "Very few know that he spent years refusing privilege because he wanted to understand what an ordinary life required. He chose a modest apartment over a mansion, ordinary work over executive offices, and quiet service over public recognition. He believed respect should be earned before authority was accepted." The room grew completely still. Vanessa felt every word settle heavily in her heart. She remembered countless evenings when Marcus had insisted that kindness mattered more than appearances, that integrity lasted longer than expensive possessions, and that patience revealed character. She had mistaken those beliefs for a lack of ambition. Now she understood they had been signs of extraordinary strength. Harold smiled gently before delivering the final truth. "Marcus has never needed wealth to become an honorable man. Wealth simply revealed to the world what character had already built." Another wave of applause filled the ballroom, stronger than before. Business leaders, university presidents, community organizers, and longtime partners rose to their feet one after another until nearly every guest was standing. Marcus accepted the recognition with a grateful nod rather than a triumphant smile. When the applause finally softened, he stepped toward the microphone. "Thank you," he said simply. "My grandfather taught me something many years ago. A title may open a door, but only character decides whether people are happy to see you walk through it. I hope Kingsley Group will continue being known not only for what we build, but for the lives we help build together." His remarks lasted less than a minute, yet the sincerity behind them carried more weight than any rehearsed speech. As he stepped away from the podium, dozens of guests approached to greet him. Several nonprofit leaders thanked him for expanding scholarship programs. Physicians expressed gratitude for new hospital investments. Young entrepreneurs introduced themselves with genuine admiration. Marcus gave each person the same attention regardless of their position or influence. Standing near the back of the ballroom, Vanessa watched quietly while Patricia lowered her eyes for perhaps the first time in years. Neither woman had been publicly embarrassed. No harsh words had been spoken. No one pointed fingers or demanded apologies. The evening itself had become the answer. The room had not chosen Marcus because he possessed extraordinary wealth. It had chosen him because wealth and humility had somehow found the rare courage to exist inside the same man. And that truth was far more powerful than anything either of them had believed when they watched him walk away from their lives. The applause gradually faded into quiet conversation as guests returned to their tables, yet something invisible had changed inside the ballroom. It was not the lighting, the music, or the elegant surroundings. It was perspective. The same room that had once measured people by appearance now understood the quiet value of character. Marcus spent the next hour moving from table to table, thanking volunteers, speaking with scholarship recipients, listening to physicians describe new community health programs, and encouraging young entrepreneurs who had received grants from the foundation. He never rushed a conversation simply because someone else carried a more impressive title. Every person received the same steady attention. That was the leadership Harold had hoped the company would one day inherit. Across the ballroom, Vanessa watched him with a mixture of disbelief and painful clarity. She remembered countless evenings when Marcus had quietly volunteered on weekends without posting about it online. She remembered how he always treated waiters, janitors, receptionists, and executives with the same respect. She had mistaken consistency for lack of ambition. She now understood that genuine confidence had never required an audience. Patricia finally placed a gentle hand on her daughter's arm. Her voice, usually so certain, carried an unfamiliar softness. I spent years believing success could be recognized by expensive things. Tonight, I realized I never learned how to recognize dignity. Vanessa lowered her eyes without answering. Regret offered no shortcuts back to yesterday. A few moments later, Marcus walked toward the ballroom exit after thanking the event organizers. As he approached the lobby, he noticed Vanessa standing quietly beside the grand staircase. She did not block his path. She simply waited. When their eyes met, neither of them spoke immediately. The silence felt different now. It no longer carried anger or disappointment. It carried acceptance. Vanessa finally drew a slow breath. "I owe you an apology." Marcus listened without interruption. "I thought I was chasing a better future," she continued. "I never realized I was walking away from the person who had already given me the best part of my life." Marcus offered a small, sincere smile. "Thank you for saying that." She searched his face, hoping to find even the smallest opening back into the past. "Is there any chance we could begin again?" Marcus looked through the tall glass windows toward the city lights stretching across the night sky before answering. "There was a time when I would have said yes without thinking. But life keeps moving, and people have to move with it." His voice remained gentle, free from bitterness. "I truly hope you find happiness, Vanessa. I mean that." She nodded slowly as tears gathered in her eyes, not because he had rejected her harshly, but because he had done so with kindness she no longer deserved to expect. Marcus wished her well, then continued toward the entrance without looking back. Outside, the cool evening breeze carried the distant sounds of the city while his waiting sedan pulled quietly to the curb. Harold stood just inside the doorway, watching his grandson leave with quiet pride. Nathan joined him and smiled. "You built an extraordinary company." Harold shook his head gently. "No. Tonight, I finally saw the man who will build something even greater." Marcus entered the waiting car as the driver closed the door behind him. The vehicle eased away from the hotel, disappearing into the rhythm of the city without fanfare or celebration. Behind him, the ballroom lights continued to glow, but he never turned around to see them again. Some victories do not arrive with trophies or loud applause. Some victories arrive as peace. Marcus had not won because he inherited an empire. He had won because he never allowed humiliation to steal his character, wealth to define his identity, or regret to control his future. The greatest inheritance he carried had never been the kingly fortune. It was the quiet strength to remain the same honorable man whether the world overlooked him or finally stood to applaud. In the end, he did not reclaim the past. He reclaimed himself, and that was the one victory nobody could ever take away.